Hello, and welcome to episode 20 of the PI Filmmaker podcast. I can't believe we're already up to 20 episodes. Now, this week, I'm going to be chatting about a recent Q&A that I attended with Walter Murch. Me and Miranda went down to London for day tripping down to London on the 21st of June because at the Prince Charles Cinema in London, they were doing a screening of Return to Oz, which is a sort of semi-sequel to The Wizard of Oz, although it's very different in tone, and it was screening as part of their Bleak Week series. Now, Bleak Week is a kind of mini film festival that's screening sort of the kind of miserable films. I think it started in LA, but a couple of years ago when me and Miranda were in New York, we went to two screenings, Bleak Week screenings, at the Paris Theatre, which is right near Central Park, both for Q&As, and one was for a film called Margaret, which kind of got butchered on release, and then the director did his director's cut, and then people were saying, oh, this is a masterpiece, and it was the director of Manchester by the Sea. He made this film called Margaret, I think around 2000. It's like 3 hours long, but my God, what a film. And so when we were in New York, we went and saw Margaret with a Q&A with the director, his wife, who was also an actor in the film, and also one of the actors showed up, Anna Paquin, who, I think that's how you pronounce it. She was in X-Men and what was the vampire thing? Was it True Blood or something? Anyway, really, really good. And then we also did another Bleak Week screening of a film called Hardcore. Is it called? I think it's called Hardcore. I actually bought the Blu-ray recently, but I can't remember what it was called. But it was with Paul Schrader. And for those of you who don't know, Paul Schrader was the writer of things like Taxi Driver. He's directed films like American Gigolo. What else has he done more recently? The Card Counter, First Reformed with Ethan Hawke, which was probably his kind of most successful critically acclaimed film in recent years. And he did a Q&A after the screening of this film called Hardcore, and Hardcore's about this guy who discovers that his daughter might have ended up being, I've bloody forgotten what happens, but might have been kidnapped, or she disappears. Yeah, she disappears, and she might be on drugs and appearing in porn films. And the lead actor, the character, goes out to LA to try and find his daughter. But Paul Schrader, my God, what a Q&A. I wish I'd have recorded it on my phone just to share it. Had I known that I was starting this podcast, I absolutely would have recorded that and shared it, because he was just spilling the tea, as the kids say. Or do they say that anymore? I don't know. But he was kind of spilling the beans on what it was like working on that project, and apparently the lead actor was a nightmare, like hiding in his trailer and refused to come out. And Paul Schrader had to beg him to come out the trailer, and the actor said, "I'll come out if you promise to never direct another film again." And Paul Schrader said, "Okay, I promise." And honest, he just had the audience in fits of laughter. He was so good, like the most honest Q&A I've ever seen, where there was a filmmaker who really was willing to just say the reality of what actually happened, and he really just don't give a fuck. So Bleak Week, I'm glad that it's now come over to the UK, and Prince Charles Cinema screening some films. So they were doing Return to Oz. So Return to Oz, the original film's obviously Wizard of Oz, that is. Well, it's not the original film. I think there was one in the 20s, wasn't there? But the one we're all familiar with, the Judy Garland one, was like 1939. Musical, technicolor, like super bright, super colourful. And Return to Oz is 1985. It looks grim as hell, and it is grim as hell. Like, we have potentially Dorothy, spoilers for a 40, how old were you? Yeah, 41-year-old film. She goes potentially for electroshock therapy. They think her family thinks she's deluded and that she's having some sort of psychosis because of Oz. Once she's in Oz, anyone who's my age who saw this film on VHS as a kid they'll remember certain sequences from this film because it was just terrifying. And it doesn't surprise me that it's screening as part of Bleak Week, because it was seriously bleak for kids of my age. There's a sequence with a number of heads that are in cabinets, and the kind of villain, this witch villain, she can change her head and put on other heads, and it was just frightening as a kid. There's these kind of rocks that have faces that also kind of freak me out. And then the one that most people will remember is these characters called the Wheelers, which are kind of like clowns on wheels, on like stilt wheels. I don't know, it really scared the shit out of me. And watching it again on Sunday, the sound design with those wheels is just so creepy, and there's like screeching. And actually, an interesting thing that I noticed, that I've not seen it in decades, so maybe I noticed it at the time, but when Dorothy's being taken for the electroshock therapy, she's on kind of a stretcher, a hospital stretcher thing, and they're wheeling her through, and it was the same, they'd kind of mirrored the same sound design for when the Wheelers eventually appear in Oz. And some of the Wheelers were actually the people wheeling her through the hospital. So that was a nice touch. Anyway, I'm going on tangents here. So Walter Murch, oh, the cough's back. So Walter Murch, he directed Return to Oz. Oh, it is really back. Might be nerves, I don't know. Walter Murch directed Return to Oz, but prior to Return to Oz, he worked in sound, he'd worked as an editor on some pretty big films. So he came up with George Lucas. He was at the same film school as George Lucas. George Lucas, obviously creator of Star Wars. And for two people to have come out the same film school, one who goes on to change the world basically and make Star Wars, another who's really changed how we think about editing, sound design. Walter Murch has written books on editing. I've got a new one that came out last year. I've not went my way through it. It's a big fat book called Suddenly Something Clicked. He really does think about the art of how to use sound, how to use editing to tell a story, to create an emotion. So he came up with George Lucas, and the story goes that George Lucas, the two best film students, were put forward for a kind of internship at Warner Brothers, and they got to shadow Francis Ford Coppola on a film he was making in the late 60s. And there were two students up for it, but Lucas and Murch made a pact that whoever got the position, they would bring the other one with them at some point. So Lucas gets this position. Obviously, Lucas and Coppola, however you want to pronounce it, form a great friendship, and Lucas eventually brings on Walter Murch, and they work at this company called American Zoetrope, and they had this idea of working out of San Francisco and being like kind of bohemian filmmakers and going against the Hollywood system. It didn't really work. They had a load of money from Warner Brothers, and then the first film that they made at this company, first feature, was THX 1138, which Lucas wrote and directed. I believe he wrote it with Murch, and Murch worked on it in editing and sound. And anyway, Warner Brothers saw it and thought, what the fuck? And then they pulled the plug on the other films. And the other films did include things like Apocalypse Now. So after that, they've blown all their money, and it's nice to see Coppola's still having that approach to filmmaking, that he'll blow money on films and kind of really, he's all for the art. But Lucas is a bit more realistic in terms of, like, at some point we have to make money. And a studio offered him The Godfather, that film, probably one of the great, well, Steven Spielberg says is the greatest American film ever made, and I would have to agree. Apparently when Spielberg saw The Godfather, he just went into an absolute depression. He was like, I will never make a film this good. And I would agree. Like, I'm sat here right now knowing that I will probably never make I will definitely never make a film as good as The Godfather. But Coppola needed money, And Lucas said, listen, you're going to have to make this thing. You're going to have to. We're broke. This company's going under. So they made The Godfather, and Walter Murch works on that film. I've spoken previously about this is spoilers for a very old film from the 70s. I've spoken previously about the scene in which Michael kills Solozzo and the police captain, the police chief. In that sequence, we have this slow push into Michael as he debates what to do. His eyes darting left and right. Al Pacino plays Michael, and his eyes are darting left to right. And Murch did this very interesting thing. We don't see at any point an establishing shot of a train, an elevated train passing the restaurant that they're in. But Murch established through sound that a train was passing, screeching, going overhead. Now, we don't see this, but this is an example of like that idea that you can not always afford something, but you can paint it through sound. So you can present an idea through sound. And so he establishes it. So early on, they're in the restaurant, we hear the train. Then Michael's in the toilet because they hide a gun in the toilet. So he's getting the gun, we hear the train again. And then finally, when he sits down, he's got the gun. He's thinking what to do. And we push into Al Pacino, Michael Corleone's face. And Murch adds the train sound effect, and it's almost like the train is in the restaurant. It's screeching, and it's like that idea that actually this is going on in his head, because we accept that the sound levels aren't existing like that in the restaurant. It's like the train is passing them in the restaurant. Now this is that idea of an artistic license, that we understand that that's not literally happening, but the filmmaking puts us in that headspace. And that, for me, is one of the great moments of cinema, that slow pushing to Al Pacino. Al Pacino's eyes doing the heavy lifting of what this character's thinking, that he's in absolute turmoil. And then the absolute cherry on top is the sound design, the thought process of Walter Murch to go, okay, we can do something really interesting. Without that train sound, I do wonder how effective that moment would have been. So Walter Murch is someone that is like an idol to me. After that, he worked on American Graffiti, which was George Lucas's film. And on that project, if you go and look at the special features on like the DVD or Blu-ray or whatever you have, Walter Murch talks about his approach to the sound of that film. He called it worldizing the sound. So we're constantly hearing radios, we're hearing music coming from different shops, shop windows, cars, and he was doing lots of things where he was playing music, for instance, but then he would re-record it through a speaker. So it was really putting you in that world. And this is someone, he's not just going through the motions of, okay, we need to slap some music on here. He's really thinking about, okay, but how do we get the audience in the zone of that space? Like, so worldizing the sound. Since then, this guy, he's won Oscars, Walter Murch. He's written books on editing. He won 2 Oscars for The English Patient, 1 for editing, 1 for sound mixing. He's someone who edits standing up, because this is really interesting. So he doesn't sit down because he sees his work almost like, what did he say? Did he say a carpenter or a butcher? Like, he sees it as real manual work where you've got to stand up so that you're in that, you're not just slouching in the chair, you're stood up, you're thinking, you know that this is work. I don't know, mate. It works for him. And Walter Murch was, I think The English Patient was the first film edited on an Avid. I could be wrong, but I know for a fact that Cold Mountain, which he also edited, the Nicole Kidman film, that was the first film to be edited on Final Cut Pro, and he really embraced that platform. And he was really disappointed when Apple moved away from the Final Cut Pro that we knew or that we know. Final Cut Pro 7, for instance, which I still edit on. I swear by it. I don't know what Walter Murch edits on now, but he was really disappointed when they abandoned it and they kind of turned Final Cut Pro into almost like an iMovie, where it was just really simplistic sort of platform with a timeline. So Walter Murch, through the years, is someone that has been a constant inspiration to me. I always enjoyed watching him in interviews on DVDs and things like that. If you watch Apocalypse Now, he was heavily involved in that. He was one of the editors on that film. He was one of the sound people on that film. If you look at the opening of Apocalypse Now, how, again, using editing and sound to present a character's headspace. So we have Willard, who feels like wants to be back in the jungle when he's even in a hotel room. So we have overlays like of the jungle, of bombs going off, but then we have this beautiful bit of sound design in the opening. Like the opening 7 minutes of that film are incredible. Like every filmmaker should, or aspiring filmmaker should, just watch that opening 7 minutes of Apocalypse Now and study what the cuts are doing, what the sound design's doing. We have this shot of a fan whirling round in the bedroom, and this is a moment that everyone speaks of. Well, not everyone speaks of, but a lot of film people are familiar with, because Walter Murch was thinking, okay, we could use the actual sound of the helicopter for that whirling fan on the roof. And actually it was something that when I was at film school, the writer of a film, or the director of a film, put it into a film that I then had to edit, because I was the editor, and we basically copied it. I didn't, in hindsight, well, I'm not sure I thought it was a good idea at the time, because it's kind of you're only ever going to get compared to a great film like Apocalypse Now. But what the hell, we were film students, we didn't know any better. But Walter Murch is he's someone who's really, really always thinking about the art of film editing, of film sound, and he wrote a book that often gets cited in film schools. It's called In the Blink of an Eye. And he developed this thing called the Rule of Six. And he says, the first thing discussed in film school editing classes is what I'm going to call three-dimensional continuity. In shot A, a man opens a door, walks halfway across the room, and then the film cuts to the next shot, B, picking him up at the same hallway point and continuing with him the rest of the way across the room, where he sits down at his desk. And he says a lot of time in film school it was about thinking about editing as continuity. So presenting, as he says, someone walks in a room, in the next shot we don't have a jump cut, and this was obviously one of the inventions of French New Wave, that you could just leap forward in time and have someone halfway through a room and then they'd be sat down at a table. But what Walter Murch developed was this rule of six for editing. So 6 rules that he thinks of, or he's mindful of, when he's editing a film. And he says, I actually place the 3-dimensional continuity at the bottom of his 6 criteria for what makes a good cut. And at the top of his list is emotion. And he says this is the thing you come to last, if at all, at film school, largely because it's the hardest thing to define and deal with. How do you want the audience to feel? If they're feeling what you want them to feel all the way through the film, you've done about as much as you can ever do. What they finally remember is not the editing, not the camera work, not the performances, not even the story, it's how they felt. An ideal cut for me is the one that satisfies all of the following 6 criteria at once. 1, it's true to the emotion of the moment. 2, it advances the story. 3, it occurs at the right moment, that is rhythmically interesting and right. I don't know what the dramatic pause was there. It's because he's put right in quotation marks. I guess it's because it's right. It's like, well, how do you define that? Like, everyone's right is going to be slightly different, but his right is his right. Hopefully that makes sense. 4, it acknowledges what you might call the movement of the audience's focus of interest within the frame. So the idea that, okay, between this cut and this cut, the audience's eyes are going to be directed where you want them to be directed, or not. Sometimes you might want the audience to move their eyes across the screen. 5, it respects the planarity, the grammar of 3 dimensions transposed by photography to 2. So the questions of stage line, etc. So basically what he's talking about there is 180-degree rule. And 6, it respects three-dimensional continuity of the actual space, so where people are in the room and in relation to one another. So we've not got a wide shot in which one character's far left of the frame, one character's far right of the frame, and then suddenly the next cut are stood right next to each other. There is some continuity. And he actually assigns percentages to the importance of these things. So 1, emotion, 51%. 2, story, 23%. 3, rhythm, 10%. 4, eye trace, 7%. 5, two-dimensional plane of screen, 5%. Did I say eye trace 7%? Anyway, yeah, eye trace was 7%. 6, three-dimensional space of action, 4%. So emotion is at the top of this list. It's the thing you should try to preserve at all costs. If you find you have to sacrifice some of them certain things, you have to sacrifice from the bottom up. For instance, if you're considering a range of possible edits for a particular moment in the film, and you find that there's one cut, I'll get my words out today, one cut that gives the right emotion and moves the story forward and is rhythmically satisfying and respects eye trace, but fails to preserve the continuity of three-dimensional space, then by all means that is the cut you should make. Okay. He says, if emotion is right and the story is advanced in a unique, interesting way, in the right rhythm, the audience will tend to be unaware or unconcerned about editorial problems with lower order items like eye trace, stage lines, spatial continuity. The general principle seems to be that satisfying the criteria of items higher on the list tends to obscure problems with items lower on the list, not vice versa. Excuse me. Now, in practice, you'll find that those top 3 things on the list, emotion, story, rhythm, are extremely tightly connected. The forces that bind them together are like the bonds between the protons and neutrons in the nucleus of the atom. Those are by far the tightest bonds, and the forces connecting the lower 3 grow progressively weaker as you go down the list. Most of the time, you'll be able to satisfy all 6 criteria: three-dimensional space and the two-dimensional plane of the screen and the eye trace, and the rhythm, story, and emotion will all fall into place. And of course, you should always aim for this if possible. Never accept less when more is available to you. What I'm suggesting is a list of priorities if you have to give up something. Don't ever give up emotion before story. Don't ever give up story before rhythm. My tongue's going again. And don't give up rhythm before eye trace. Don't give up eye trace before planarity. And don't give up planarity before spatial continuity. I've done, in the past, I did a lesson where I actually taught to students about Murch's rule of 6, and without them knowing, I asked the students to just rank with percentages how important they thought those 6 things were. And when I did that lesson, I remember students were putting continuity and things like that up at the top, one thinking about 180-degree rule, eye trace. I remember they were actually, I think they put story near the top as well, but I remember they were shocked when emotion was at the top. I think students are a bit more savvy now. I think they're aware of this, because when I did that lesson, it would have been 2010, maybe 11. I think a lot of film students are now aware of this rule of 6. And one of the things I've found in recent years, last 5-6 years or whatever, is you'll speak to editors, for instance, and they'll think, oh, I saw this a lot. We're going to think about Murch's rule of 6 and we're going to think about emotion. But what Murch says there is the emotion right for that moment? Like anyone can just say, and that's what Murch says, it's completely subjective, and film schools don't talk about these things because it becomes difficult to define. And in education, if you want students to have a clear understanding, you've got to teach them things that are easy to understand. Whereas emotion, that's completely subjective, whether a moment has the right emotion. But what he talks about is what is the emotion that you're trying to make audiences feel in that moment. And one thing I rarely heard coming from film students, okay, this moment is about this, so therefore we're going to prioritize shots that show this. So for instance, in Notion, we've got scenes where, I don't know, Seth is saying something to Penny, and at times you want to be holding on. I just confused the actor's name with one of the character names. Penny's played by Caitlin. You want to hold on Penny because what Matt is saying might be upsetting her in some way or might be making her happy in some way. And as she's the main character, you might want to be holding on her to show her emotional reaction to that moment. So one of the things I always like to hear students say is not just we're going to prioritize emotion and rhythm and story, but like why? What is actually happening within this moment? And the reason why Murch is such a hero is because he can talk you through every moment in his film and why he's done specific things. I remember there was a documentary on on the Phantom Menace DVD in which lots of filmmakers, I think Coppola was there, Lucas was obviously there, Murch was there, talking about editing and the decisions you make around deleted scenes. And Walter Murch was working on a film, I think it was in the late 80s, and they were looking at the cuts, and Murch identified one scene that he said, this is just killing the film. And he said the director looked at him and said, you know, when I read the book, this was the moment where I thought I could direct the film of this. And Murch was looking at him like, do we make the cut? And the director said, yeah, you're right, it's got to go. But just making those difficult decisions that a director's saying, this was the thing that connected me to this story and now it's got to go. I want to say it was the Unbearable Lightness of Being. I think that was the title, but I could be wrong. But I remember specifically what the lesson was from that documentary, that sometimes it's like kill your babies. Sometimes you got to kill your darlings. And Walter Murch is prepared to make those difficult choices. And it's because he's thinking about, okay, are the audience going to be feeling what they should be feeling within this moment? Is the cut telling the story? Is it progressing the story? Is it rhythmically interesting? And one of the things I like to show students when thinking about, oh, we have a fly. Hopefully you're not hearing that. One of the things I like to show is a scene from Goodfellas. Now, Walter Murch didn't edit Goodfellas, but it speaks to his ideas around the rule of six and approaching cuts for a film. It's a scene from Goodfellas. It's the funny house scene where Joe Pesci basically intimidates Henry Hill, played by Ray Liotta, and he starts saying, funny how, like I amuse you. Now you show that scene to anyone and it's like, oh my god, what the hell, like this guy, he's a psycho, he's an absolute psycho, and he's gonna destroy Ray Liotta's character. And then he kind of says, oh, get fuck off, like, and they all start laughing, and it's like, oh, I almost had him. When you're watching that scene, it's like, oh my god, that's terrifying. And then you pause it and you show it again and you say to students, from now I want you to look at Ray Liotta's hands and the continuity of every other character within that scene. And when you watch Ray Liotta's hands, there's repeated action, there's continuity errors where glasses are disappearing, glasses are not in his hand, glasses are in his hand, cigarettes are in his hand, cigarettes are not in his hand. And Scorsese and Schoonmaker, obviously when they're working on those films, they're saying, okay, what is the right emotion, what is telling the story, what's the right rhythm, even if we have to sacrifice things like continuity and all those rules associated with continuity in terms of our cuts. And it works. The audience forgives those things because they're invested in the story, they're in the moment. So I think Walter Murch's rule of six is brilliant in that regard, and I'm sure Scorsese and Schoonmaker would be saying, yeah, that's how we always approach it. There's another moment in Goodfellas where a restaurant owner, what's he called? I forget. He goes to Paulie, the head sort of gangster, and he says, this Tommy, he's coming in my place, he's causing so much chaos, and I need you to help me out, Paulie. And there's a cigar that's like in Paulie's mouth on one shot, and then it literally disappears on the reverse shot. It just disappears out of his mouth. It's like the first time you watch it, you're not looking at that, but you notice on subsequent viewings, and you're like, oh wow, that's interesting that you could get away with such disregard for continuity. Now, as Murch says, you don't want to be just throwing continuity completely out the window. In an ideal world, you want all of those things to be working in complete harmony, but sometimes things happen on set, issues arise, and you have to sacrifice things in the edit, or open yourself up to, okay, it doesn't work in terms of continuity, but the audience are going to be with this emotionally, in terms of the story, in terms of the rhythm of the cuts. This is working. And I've been to previous Q&As with Murch in the past. So I think it was around 2013. He was editing a documentary, and they were screening that documentary at Sheffield Docfest, and then so Murch came along and did a sort of 1 hour guest talk, in which he presented some of these ideas. Like, he's someone like you. One of his books is called In the Blink of an Eye, because he realized that he was looking at edits and he was like, I wonder why I cut when I cut. And he said he almost always found that the very next frame after he'd cut, an actor blinked. And he started thinking, okay, I'm cutting there because subconsciously, almost like intuitively, I'm feeling that the actor's finished their thought. And he's always thinking, okay, where do you want to direct the eye, and when does it feel like the moment's finished? And he found that when they blinked in the next frame, and it seemed like the actor had finished their thought in the moment. He said years later, some like PhD students came to him and said, yeah, you're right, like blinks are connected to thought process. So he was instinctively doing things that aligned with the human thought process, and this is obviously why he's a great thinker and a great editor and a great filmmaker and a great writer on editing and sound and things like that. Another book that I read a few years ago, actually I read it years ago, I found it in a library when I worked at a college, but I got my own copy, was the Conversation series. That's a really good book as well, in which a journalist asks Murch questions about editing and sound and all these other things, and Murch answers him. Really good book. So I also, a couple of years ago, it's almost exactly 2 years ago, went to another Q&A he did at the Prince Charles Cinema, and that was for The Conversation. Now, I've spoken about The Conversation. Did I mention that he edited that and he did the sound? This was the first film he was due to be editor on. Get my words out. Sorry, I was just thinking through what I was going to do. I've realised I've talked for 30 minutes and I've not actually got to his Q&A for Return to Oz. That's why I suddenly paused dramatically. And he was editing this film, and Coppola was due to go and direct Godfather 2. And he spoke at that Q&A about how Coppola was like, listen, I can't be working on this huge film and working on the edit for this smaller film. We're going to have to abandon the edit and come back to it later. And Murch was kind of distraught, because he was like, the studio are going to think the problem is this new guy in the edit doesn't know what he's doing. So Murch had a kind of crisis. He went out for a run. I've actually uploaded the video onto my Instagram page where he spoke about these things, but I'll just tell it for people listening. He went for a run, and then he called Coppola and he said, give me a week to see what I can do, because they were actually missing loads of scenes from the edit, and they were struggling to figure out, okay, how do we turn this into the film? He said there was 78 scenes not shot, Murch, which is kind of frightening. He said like the first cut was like four hours or something, and they were still missing 78 scenes. So he showed a graphic on screen in which each scene was represented by a square, and he sped up the process of how he eventually came to The Conversation we saw in cinemas, and obviously is a massively acclaimed film. It won the Palme d'Or, huge success for everyone involved, and just a great film, one of the great films of the 1970s. He showed this graphic where he sped up every scene and how it moved around. So it might be that a scene comes from near the end of the film, becomes part of the start of the film. It was almost insane. He called it like a Tetris game where blocks of scenes are just moving around this board. And even though they were missing scenes, they managed to turn it into something. He identified moments where he would just need a shot, where they could go off for a couple of days, pick up shots that would connect the moments, and he managed to do it. So even though they had this kind of crisis moment, this, oh my God, what are we going to do? We haven't got the film. Now the director's saying we're going to have to just kind of leave it, put it on the back burner. This was his opportunity to become the full editor on a film, and shit's hit the fan. But Murch turned it round, and it kind of shows the kind of possibilities. Like the amount of times I've worked with students and they're like, oh, we haven't got this, it's not going to work. And it's like, well, there's a film, they've got a 4-hour cut and a 4-hour assembly cut. They're missing 78 scenes. He says 120 scenes eventually didn't go into the film, so that's the 78 they were missing, plus like what, 40 other scenes that they don't have, 42 scenes or whatever. 42 scenes as well as, I'll get my words out, as well as the 78, sorry, I'm reading my notes again, that didn't make it into the film. And yet in the conversation we have an incredible film. And that's what can happen when you're someone who's really thinking about editing as something that's more than just putting the script together. And one thing that I used to find frustrating when I was supervising student films is that not enough time was ever given to the editing process, that you would end up having a week after they'd shot, they're kind of submitting their films, and it's like, well, of course things didn't work out as planned. Like, what we should have done is shot in week 2 and then like identified from week 6 through to 13 or 12 or whatever the trimester runs for, what we can do in editing to make this film work, because that is really where a film comes together. Like, if you think about what Murch did with The Conversation, or you think that Scorsese has it in his contracts that he'll have a year in editing for his films, because that's how long he wants, and that's like working full time on it every day, like looking at the cuts, how do we tell this story. Throughout history there's so many examples of things that were discovered in editing. Like Bresson talks about the fact that when you film your film, you go on set, you've got your scripts, it seems like it's coming alive, then it dies on camera. And he says, yet when you start to put it together in a certain way, suddenly it comes alive. And that's really how I think about editing, that this is a process in which we're telling the final version of this story. And that's why it kind of frustrates me, like when you see in education modules where like half the time on an editing module is dedicated to color grading, for instance. It's like, color grading is not going to save your film. It really isn't. Like, that's not going to save a story, the emotion of a story, because like Murch says, ultimately people remember how the film made them feel, not how flashy it was, how technically perfect it was. I did teach a module at one university once called Editing the Creation of Meaning, and I was the kind of module leader, and I loved that module because it was all about, yeah, you got them to do, students do editing tasks, but you spend the whole time just getting them to think about why we make that cut. Things like the rule of 6, understanding continuity editing, but also understanding we don't have to necessarily follow that if we're trying to get the audience to engage in the right emotion and rhythm and the story. So yeah, it kind of frustrates me because colour grading does not save your film. I remember once I was supervising a student film and their film was well over the limit for what they were able to show, what they were able to submit. So say they were asked to submit a 15-minute film, they had like a 25-minute film, and I was speaking to the editor, I was like, right, so what's the plan? Thinking they would have thought through, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this. We're going to target these scenes, a bit like what Murch did. And I know that's difficult to compare a student with Walter Murch, but once upon a time, Walter Murch was a student as well. And even on those early films, it was clear to me he was thinking about film in this way, that it's not just, okay, we're presenting the script edited, we're going to edit the script together. He's thinking, okay, that was that, but now what have we got and how do we best tell this story? And I said to the student, what are we going to do? And he said, well, once I add the colour grade, I think the story's going to come together. It blew my mind. I thought, you think that adding a LUT, a sepia LUT for instance, is going to cut out 10 minutes of your film and help you tell this story that you're well over the running time on? Like, you're going to be able to formulate this 25-minute film into a 15-minute film by adding LUTs? Like, that's not the answer. And I think that's kind of, it's like Murch says, like, where film schools don't want to address those things because emotion, story, and rhythm, like when Murch put in quotation marks, it was rhythmically right in quotation marks. It's like, how do you start to define that? One of the things I used to say to film students was, There's no wrong answers in filmmaking, but some answers are more right than others. Because like you could have a version of that Goodfellas scene, for instance, which is right in terms of continuity, but wrong in terms of the emotion, the rhythm. It's disjointed. It doesn't quite, the tension doesn't quite work. People, I know this is difficult doing podcasts in which I'm describing visuals, but if you please go and check out the Goodfellas funny house scene to understand what I mean. So yeah, I think it's difficult to get into those things. So institutions want to concentrate on the things you can clearly understand, like, okay, is this going to be broadcastable? Is the skin tones right? Like, to me, like, color grading has nothing to do with editing. It really has nothing to do with it. Like, I could teach a module, and I think all film schools should be doing this. Like, you just spend 6 weeks. Like Walter Murch, I'm sure, could do 13 weeks just analysing. So he did the in 1998. I think it was Universal wanted to recreate Orson Welles' ideas for A Touch of Evil. So Touch of Evil was released in the 1950s. It was butchered, classic story of the studio going, what the fuck, let's cut this up. Which happened a lot to Orson Welles. I'm well on a tangent here. Like, there's another film he made called Magnificent Ambersons, and there's someone out there now is making a documentary because they're trying to remake his ideas, and basically in the Magnificent Ambersons put in, because apparently the studio hated Orson Welles so much that they threw the footage that was deleted into the sea. That's like, oh my god, I heard that story and I was like, oh my god, I'd vomit. Imagine having, not only have they cut your film up, they've thrown like the missing scenes into the sea. So apparently there's someone out there right now who's trying to, I think they're doing it with AI, which I'm not wild about, or animation, which if it's animation, cool, but they're going to try and put in the missing sequences, which sounds incredible. But anyway, slight tangent. Walter Murch was tasked with putting back together Touch of Evil, and this is now available. His version is on, I want to say Eureka Blu-ray. Anyway, I've got the version. It's on the shelf. Comes with a nice booklet and all those usual things. Go and check it out. I think it's Eureka Entertainment in the UK, but you can get the theatrical version and the Murch cut. Murch, I'm sure, could put together just a 12-week module just on looking at how we came to do the director's cut of Touch of Evil and what the changes do to a film. Like, one thing I always say to film students, and this is becoming a bit like a lecture, go and look at theatrical cuts and director's cuts of films. What changes? Why does it change? How does it change the rhythm? Like, one of the great lessons for me was the Lord of the Rings extended editions, going comparing the cuts of the theatrical versions with the extended editions. What changes? Why? What's the implication of taking that scene in or putting that scene back in, and what is improved by taking it out? Like, there's cuts in the extended editions, even though everyone goes, like the fans of Lord of the Rings, like, go, the extended editions are the only way. There's certain cuts that I actually think, especially in the third one, undermine the tension of certain scenes and certain moments because they've put in extra beats. Like, it sucks the tension out of a moment. For the most part, I do think that the extended editions, especially the Two Towers, the second film, are improved by the extended edition. But in Return of the King, there's moments, and it's almost like Peter Jackson said, okay, this is our last chance, let's just put out a 4-hour film. But it's like, actually, some of the tension is lost because you've put in extra beats, extra moments that obviously you were more mindful of when you had 3 hours in the cinema. So, to me, spending 4 or 5 weeks on colour grading when you could just spend 12 weeks looking at why we cut on that particular moment on an actor, or it's because they blink in the next moment, they've clearly lost that emotion. Sometimes you might want the blink. Sometimes I hold on a blink just to show that someone's feeling uncomfortable. Like, all of these moments create implications and create a feeling in the audience. But it's difficult to get into those things when you're teaching filmmaking. It really is. And so people teach the things that are easy to define, like, oh, is the skin tone of the actor right? So anyway, Walter Murch, that was just that tangent I've gone on was just for Walter Murch and The Conversation. But anyway, if you've not seen The Conversation with Gene Hackman, incredible film, and totally had its finger on the pulse, because this is a film about wiretapping, about surveillance, about this character who's feeling like his work is leading towards trouble for a couple. And yet Walter Murch and Coppola, they do this really interesting thing where Gene Hackman is constantly mulling over these tapes, and we hear a line of dialogue one way, and then at the end they change the intonation and they use another take to show that actually what they were initially thinking, this main character, turned out to be false, and it was because they'd projected onto a sound recording. So almost how sound, you can interpret sound as well. So Walter Murch, just an absolute legend, and the last Q&A was great that I went to, and so was this one. So I'm finally at the point where we can discuss Return to Oz. Obviously I've mentioned what it's about. It's a film in the 80s, 1985, so this film is now as old as me. Walter Murch came to do a Q&A for the film. He also introduced the film, which was a bonus. No one was expecting him to come out to introduce the film, but apparently he sat at the back of the room and watched the film. It was projected on 70mm, so Walter Murch said, like, this film that you're seeing is now, well, it was literally as old as me, so we were watching a film print as old as me, which is kind of mind-blowing. And just to see those flickers, the grain, apparently something had gone wrong with a little bit of the reel, the final reel. It had been, I think he said magnetized or something. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to play all of it for the listeners, the introduction and the Q&A. Apologies for bumping the phone at certain points. Obviously I was recording it on my notes app, but I hope this is of interest to people. If you're a child of the 80s like me, like I'm sure you have memories of watching Return to Oz on VHS and just being scared shitless. It's not quite the 1939 musical, and for Walter Murch it proved to be the only film he directed. He's never directed since. Obviously he still had a great deal of success, won Oscars and things like that, and obviously he's a legend. Like, his thinking around editing and sound and filmmaking is unmatched. Like, if you want to learn something about filmmaking, you should be reading the books of Walter Murch and watching interviews with Walter Murch. Fuck learning about LUTs. Honestly, fuck learning about LUTs and adding colour grading. Learning about colour grading and LUTs and all that shit. Just learn about editing and filmmaking and storytelling from Walter Murch, and it'll be way more important to your development as a filmmaker than watching the bullshit you see on YouTube around, like, videographers talking about what good cinematography is. So that's my little rant for the day, and I'm now going to play the intro and the Q&A of Return to Oz by Walter Murch, and hopefully this has been of interest. If not, I don't give a shit, because Walter Murch is an absolute legend, and if this hasn't been interesting, then maybe filmmaking and thinking about film editing just isn't for you. So thank you for listening, and enjoy Walter Murch's Q&A.
I'm 82 now, so it's exactly at the halfway point in my life that this film came out, and here we are recreating that moment with 70mm 6-track sound. When you look at a piece of 70mm film, you see sprockets on either side, and then the image repeatedly separated by the frame line, which are like railroad tracks. And if you were to go up to the projection booth and watch what's happening, we are, in a sense, the cinematic equivalent of a steam locomotive up there. It's incredibly complicated, and there are many, many moving parts, any one of which can go wrong and spoil the whole experience. But we had a test screening here last Tuesday, and then again a couple of days ago, and it all seems to be working. The print itself is 41 years old. And so part of the excitement is not only watching this film, But the tension of hoping that the train stays on its track. The projectionist here told me that one of the reels toward the end has developed what was called in the day spoking, which is somebody put something magnetic on the reel at some point in the past, and so there's a little thump, thump, thump. Okay, well, it held up. It's the 70 millimeter, 41-year-old 70 millimeter print held up.
It held up very well.
Amazing.
Can I ask, in the audience, who saw this for the first time just now? Wow. Okay, quite a lot of you. That's quite extraordinary. Well, you got to see it in a fantastic way, so absolutely brilliant. Walter, I'm going to start off the questions, but I would like to have some audience questions too. How is it, as a first-time director, that you find yourself making a sequel to a very beloved film, but not only for Disney, but also 5,000 miles away in Boreham Wood?
Yeah. Well, you know, every voyage begins with a single step. It's, I think the trigger ultimately was the trauma at Disney with the success of Star Wars and the success of the Black Stallion films. Walt Disney himself had died in 1966, I think, and they had kept on going, but the steam in the engine was running out. And I think when Disney looked at those films and other films that were coming out at the same time, they thought, these are the kind of films we should be making. And they threw out a net to scoop up people from outside the usual Disney orbit. And because I was a friend of George Lucas's and we had worked together on a couple of films, and I was one of the original screenwriters on the Black Stallion, that was enough to sort of get me to come down to have a meeting. And of course I knew the meeting would ultimately be, what do you think you would like to do, you know? And so I had seen Sesame Street at the time. Our son at that time was 2 or 3 years old. And when I began thinking like this, and there was something about the sensibility of Jim Henson and the Muppets that was Ozian, and it helped also that Frank Oz was a main collaborator. And so I thought, going to that meeting, well, what about a sequel to the other books? Flash back to my childhood, these were the books that this film was based on that I grew up reading. My mother had read them when she was a child. They were like the Harry Potter books around the turn of the last century. Anyway, all of that came together, and when the question was asked, I said it was sequel to The Wizard of Oz. And the producer, who he just produced a man named Tom Wilhite, and he just produced Tim Burton's first short film called Vincent, I think, which was a little odd for Disney. He straightened up behind the desk and said, well, you know, we own the rights to all of those books, which I didn't. I had no idea because it was so long ago. But those were the triggers, and eventually it came to be me at Elstree on February 20th, 1984, saying action on this amazing confabulation of a film. I mean, this is just looking at it now, realizing everything that has happened in filmmaking over the last 41 years. I mean, there is not the slightest tinge of digital anywhere in this whole operation.
I was going to ask you, it's quite extraordinary that the film is such a mix of live action, puppetry, suit performance, claymation,
Right.
Acrobatic performance. It's extraordinary. Was that
Yeah.
even remotely daunting to you, or did you just think, I've got a job to
I
do?
was perpetually daunted. Every day was, how is this going to work? What might go wrong? Sometimes things did go wrong, although actually everything was very smooth except for the Disney executives did not like the dailies that they were seeing, and we began by shooting all of the Kansas material. And they became impatient with it, and because I'm a first-time director, and I take on those faults, we fell behind. The other thing is, for much of the film, Dorothy, for Roosevelt, is 9 years old, and that means you can only shoot for 3.5 hours a day.
Yeah.
We had doubles of Dorothy, so in the reverse shot sometimes we would use a double. But she's such a fantastic actress that every time she did anything, even if it was a reverse shot, she was doing something. And she's the only living person, on screen for 90% of the time. Otherwise, it's, as you said, it's claymation or it's puppetry. Anyway, the Disney decided to fire me after 5 weeks. There was that's the trauma that you can possibly imagine. They made a mistake in that they fired me on a Wednesday. Usually, if you're going to fire somebody, you fire them on a Friday, apparently.
Right.
So, word got back via Robert Watts, who's credited here, producer, worked on Star Wars and the Indiana Jones films. And he phoned Japan, where George Lucas was talking to Kurosawa about some project. And he said, Walter's been fired. And to his eternal credit, George jumped on a plane and flew to London and met with Richard Berger, who was the head of Disney at the time, and used some kind of Jedi mind trick on Richard Berger and said, you will rehire Walter. And I think, so I was fired on Wednesday, probably, I think by Tuesday of the next week, I was back directing. We never stopped shooting. Mike Kitchens, who was the associate producer, was directing it, and I was, it was a telephone job. I would phone Mike, and a film like this is heavily storyboarded, so we could fall back on that. But that's in the end we finished on schedule and on time, and the rest is the film.
And a beautiful film too. So it was just brilliant that you were able to get back onto it again. So, being at Elstree, you talked about Muppets and Jim Henson. Did you know that he was out there making the Muppet Show at the time, and then working with George Lucas on other things?
Yeah.
So it all kind of came together.
Yeah,
in that one phase.
The Jim Henson organization is not credited on the film. We were using people who had worked for him, and Brian Henson, his son, is the main puppeteer of Jack, and also gives the voice to Jack. So it was Henson adjacent, I guess you might say.
I'm still taken aback seeing some of the shots where we first see Jack, for example. I still don't know how you did some of those things. The characters are so believably alive, and TikTok walks upstairs even, which is quite extraordinary when you know how it's done.
Yeah, Michael Sundin is inside TikTok. He was the trampoline champion of
Great Britain.
The United Kingdom. his legs were in TikTok's legs, but he was then bent over completely, looking backwards between his legs at a tiny TV screen, which was being fed by radio frequencies from a camera outside. So he was looking at what TikTok was doing as if he was standing outside, even though he was inside. And he was also responsible for moving the arms. Tim Rose was operating the head by radio control. So.
Quite extraordinary. And he was kind of strapped in and reaching around with his arms for the.
Yeah. There was a 2.5 minute limit because you can imagine the pressure cooker of that kind of exertion in a sealed compartment. So as soon as the lid went on, okay, the stopwatch started, and 2.5 minutes later, whatever, we would have to stop.
Incredible.
But yeah, I mean, imagine upside down, backwards, looking at a video screen, walking upstairs. It's incredible. The same thing happened with the Wheelers, actually. They, a lot of training went into Michael, obviously, but the Wheelers also. John Stevenson built all of that rig and figured out how to do it. And after a while, they just, they just would lie around with their wheels on, doing little pirouettes.
Wheel themselves off the lunch.
They didn't want to take them off.
That's really extraordinary. I mean, some of the sets as well are absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah, Norman Reynolds, fantastic job.
That mirrored throne room that Wembley has is
a fascinating tidbit there was that one of the other issues that slowed us down was that the original cinematographer was Freddie Francis, fantastic cinematographer, but he was show me the shot and I will light the shot. And once I said it's a 40 millimeter lens at whatever distance from the actors, then the lights would come in and there were multiple lights. And as a result, when that happens, you can't use a second camera because you'd see the lights. Or you can use it, but really just with a telephoto lens along the same axis as the main camera, which is there's some value to it, but it doesn't give you lots of flexibility. And anyway, around the same time that I was fired, Freddie quit the film, and we had to find another cinematographer. Dave Watkin, thank God, was available. And the throne room in particular, Freddie had shot some tests on it, and because of what I just said about his lighting technique, that was a Freddie Francis nightmare, because every surface reflects the lights that you are using. And he came up with something, some lights in the ceiling, but as a result, it was very somber. There were lots of shadows on the face, and it was disagreement about that, I think, that triggered Freddie to say, I'm out. And anyway, with some nervousness, I showed David the throne room, and he walked into the room and he said, I've been waiting for this set all my life. And I said, really, why is that? Because here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a 10K over in the corner, and that means a 10,000 watt big arc light. And I'm going to bounce the light off of the ceiling, off of the floors, off of the walls, off of the ceiling again until it hits the actor. So it was like playing a snooker, where the light is the ball. And every time it hits a surface, it dissipates some of the light and spreads it over the whole room. So by the time it reaches the actor, there have been, 6 of those bounces. And as a result, you get this beautiful quality light with only one single light, which ordinarily would be used as So it's kind of as a searchlight thing, but here it gives this delicate thing. So bounce light was David's approach to almost everything. And he said, you can use 2 cameras, you can use 6 cameras. I don't care because I won't be on the set. I'll be on the next set doing a pre-light. You're in the capable hands of Gordon Heyman, the 8-camera operator, and you guys solve any problems. If there are still problems, call me. I will come reluctantly back to the set and solve the problem, maybe. But in the end, I think we called it back once, because the way he lit the set was you could put the cameras anywhere.
Incredible.
So that allowed us to speed up.
Sound is a huge part of your life. You're an Academy Award-winning sound designer, sound editor. I was struck listening at the back here to the film as it was playing. I mean, the music is absolutely beautiful. David Sharp, incredible.
And the London Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah, but there's also incredible sound design, the sounds of the wheels of the trolley in Dr. Worley's. And then something that struck me was Mombi snores when she's in bed, even though she doesn't have a head.
Well,
I've never noticed that before. I've seen this film about 30 times, and I never thought of that. But
all of this is in the book, by the way. Lumping in her heads, and I'm just following the book.
There's a touch of Murch genius in there too. I'd love to open this up to the floor for questions. There's one right at the front. We'll go straight here because your hand shot up. So. There is a microphone that's going to come.
Thank you for this absolutely wonderful film from my childhood that I absolutely love. I just wondered, when you were making it and you were doing the special effects, did you give any thought to how they'd hold up? Because I don't know what anyone else thinks, but in my opinion, 40 years on, they're still amazing. And I just think you've done such a fantastic job, so thank you.
I missed a couple.
So when you make it, I mean, looking back 40 years on, the special effects, they still stand up to this day.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, yes, I mean, there are a couple of places where I wince a little bit because we had to use blue screen when Dorothy lands in Oz with the Deadly Desert and she walks. That landscape is a blue screen composite. I mean, it's a classic 1980s looking blue screen. I mean, originally, the film was going to be very Raiders of the Lost Ark. We were going to go to the Sahara or Tunisia somewhere, Algeria, and we were going to shoot in Sardinia as the Black Stallion did. We were going to shoot obviously here, but there was a change of management in October of '83, and the new management said, this film is too expensive, there are no stars in it, so we're going to put it into turnaround unless you, me, can rewrite the screenplay, and so we can shoot it all in England, which I wound up doing.
The famous Bournemouth Desert.
Yes. The Kansas is Wiltshire, and it's the same location where Sam Mendes shot 1917, which is the Army training grounds. So it's a circle, I think 60 miles in radius, where all of the buildings, whatever they were, have been long gone, and that's that's where we found a place where we could shoot to the horizon without any power lines or anything.
Beautiful open landscape. Let's have another question. You have a hand on the floor. Go here as well, and then we'll go further afield.
Hello, thank you. What a wonderful film, even if it did terrify me quite a lot as a child. I knew Nicole Williamson in the later years of his life before he passed away. He lived in Greece and I lived there, so I knew him. He spoke of working on this film very fondly, and I just wondered, he's quite a strong character, what was it like working with him on the film?
What was it like working with Nicole Williamson?
Very good. although we had cast about, and there were a couple of people who turned us down, and eventually Nicole Williamson said yes. He was concerned about the Gnome King swallowing people, not for any other reason than he was very nervous about the dental work that he had done. And I said, don't worry, it's all going to be a special effect. But no, he was great, and put up with, as you can see, the makeup to make him into the Gnome King was very arduous. But he was very proud of it, of both how it looked and how he stood up to the time that it took.
With the production, you had a number of actors play dual roles. Is that a nod to the original MGM film, or was that something you felt was...
Yes. Although it's inherent also in the books on which the L. Frank Baum books.
There's some question. I'm going to go to the back. There's a hand there, about 3 people in, about somewhere to the, somewhere with the microphone will come to you. There we go.
Hi there. I remember going to see the film with my grandmother back in the 80s, and I remember really enjoying it. And I remember how much I remember seeing it there for the second time. I'm just wondering whether Disney, the original film was well known for musical numbers. I'm just wondering whether Disney tried to pressure you in putting songs in the film.
Did Disney want to pressure you into putting songs into the film?
No, there wasn't. They were really, to their credit, they were, I was not the only person. Matthew Robbins directed Dragon Slayer, which was also shot in England. There was a lot of that going on at the time, and there were probably executives who were wondering, but as I said, there was this impetus to break the walls. Disney was almost a monastery within Hollywood. It was all their own people traditionally. They never went outside. So this was a movement in the late 70s, early 80s to bring new people into Disney.
Right. Go over to this side. There is a hand, just 2 people in at the side.
I should just also say that the L. Frank Baum wrote this book as a book. It began as a series of stories that he told to his children. He had 4 sons. And in 1898, there was, their grandfather had died a few years earlier. The kid's grandmother had died, Baum's mother-in-law. And then a 5-month-old niece had died that same year, so there was this kind of trauma.
Yeah.
And so he told a story to the kids. The grandfather was named Henry Gage. The grandmother who had died was Matilda Gage. And the little girl who had died of meningitis was Dorothy Gage. If you change one letter in Gage, it becomes Gale. And so Uncle Henry and Aunt M for Matilda,
Right.
with Dorothy, he was saying they're alive somewhere. It was a way of consoling people. So it has this otherworldly aspect to it. And then he decided to write the book. But he was also a theatrical person. He'd been involved in theater long before he got married. And with the success of the book, people said, well, let's put on a musical. So the Wizard of Oz musical in 1902 was a huge hit and very vaudeville. And that's the kind of the direct lineage of the 1939 film. But the books are another track, and that's what I was doing. Was instead of making a track on the vaudeville circuit, this was the book circuit.
Okay, we'll do that.
I'm not sure if it's up. There we go. Thank you. Hello, Mr. Murch. Thank you. This is my first time viewing the film. It was an absolute pleasure. I have a question actually about you adapting it from the books. You said it was something from your childhood that you'd read as a child and had it read to you. I'm very curious, did you ever feel daunted by the iconography of the original film? Because obviously at that point it was almost a 50-year-old classic and such a big film for everyone, probably of your generation and the one after. So yeah, I'm just curious whether you ever felt the pressure to include iconography from the original film, because it seems very divorced from that. So yeah.
So, the 1939 film?
Yeah.
Yes, it was daunting. It was, you know, if you can imagine the book as the sun, and in 1939 there was a planet that began to revolve around the sun, which was the vaudeville version, and what we were doing was launching another planet around that particular sun at a different orbit with a different atmosphere. And it had been, I can't do the math right now, but 3 decades. And I thought, well, maybe people will be open to another look at this subject matter. I mean, the film was not commercially successful when it was released because people went expecting the MGM musical.
Yeah.
And by the time the film was released, the management as Disney was now 2 generations later. This was the, what's his name?
Eisner.
Yeah, the Eisner, Katzenberg era. And so they had no interest really in pushing or understanding the film and what they needed to do to open it up. They just kind of threw it out there. And so audiences who were not prepared, a good release would have prepared the audience to say this is going to be different. It's that syndrome of if you accidentally ever put a teaspoon of salt into your tea, thinking it's sugar, and then you taste it, it tastes worse than if you had been told it's salty tea. Because you tried for sugar and you get salt. So I think that's a little bit what the reaction was. So it's unfortunate, but thanks to this kind of enthusiasm, the film has long distance legs that have carried it forward now 41 years.
Yeah. Time someone put it out on 4K, I think. Good release. We have the last question. We're already there, are we?
I've been kind of wondering from the scene when there's the whole way of all of Mombi's heads. I was wondering how you did that.
How did you do Mombi's heads? Magic.
Magic. Who was the famous British magician?
You're saying Paul Daniels.
He was a consultant.
Was he a consultant?
Yeah, he became a consultant. We had figured it out, but he was a friend of Paul Maslansky's, and he came and he may have made a suggestion, but the visual effects supervisor was Zoran Perisic.
That's a great name.
And he had done the Superman flying stuff.
Zoptic or something, wasn't it called? The effect that you
Zoptics
was
called. It's if you look carefully, cut by cut, it's all broken down, carefully storyboarded, just so the motion of the head and everything. You never see Mombi put the head on. You only see her click it into place. So it's basically complicated analog opticals. Ironically, that was the scene I was shooting when they decided to fire me. When I watched that scene, I had very mixed emotions.
Everyone else is terrified. You're traumatized.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's basically a lot of actresses with their heads sticking out of a wall. Yeah, quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Again, the idea is straight out of the book.
Yeah.
And it has a visceral component because it's a film. I mean, when you read a book and you see the illustrations, that's one thing. When you're actually looking at live action of this, it's the knob is turned up from 7 to 11 or something. So.
Well, we've come to the end of the questions. Walter, you brought with you a couple of Blu-rays.
Yep.
What are you planning on doing with those? Do we know?
Throw them out.
Should we try and do that? I don't know if we're going to injure someone. Have we done a risk assessment? We'll work that one out, but there's a few Blu-rays to give away. To wrap up, Walter, thank you so much for such a beautiful
Absolutely.
film.